everybody. Welcome to the Istio Networking Work Group meeting. We have this new format where everybody joins from their desk. Let's hope that will lead to, a better communication and better decisions as well. We have quite a bit of governance in the agenda today. So it's actually mostly governance, except maybe for the last item, which is a follow-up on the multicluster naming convention. So I hope Vadim is online because he wrote a document about this with some proposals.
Yes, I am.
Excellent, Vadim. Thanks. So first of all, produce an epic of the roadmap for 1.2 in GitHub. So Steve proposed this, and this is very much in line with what we were planning to do. With some minor changes. So what we've been doing in the past was to have one epic per feature. And that epic would include the several issues, depending on, how many people work on it and how granular it is. Steve, okay, he's just joining, he wasn't in. Okay, Steve, we were just talking about you.
So shouldn't this be something that a code mover or a TOC decides, because each project doing its own, each working group doing its own stuff seems kind of weird.
Right. But on the other hand, we can also propose things, right? It's not
But is it something that we need part of the code move, or is it something? I mean, it seems like we have enough things that are changing at the same time. Maybe we can see how I mean, focus on code move and stuff.
What is the alternative cost in here? So this is what we've been doing in the past. And since Steve just joined, I'm not sure whether he wants to have like a one epic for the entire roadmap or something else.
Have the epic worked before? I mean, since we had used epic in the past, have they been useful? We need to expand them, or what's status with the experience we had so far?
Right. So let me tell you a bit about my experience on that, since I was the one opening the epics and trying to track things. So what I noticed in the past was that we were not disciplined. So we had PRs that were committed without being linked to an issue or an epic or anything else. So we had all kinds of like untracked features coming in, right? I would definitely like to see us moving towards a model where every PR is linked to some issue or epic and is tracked in context of the roadmap or of a feature at least.
Okay, but shouldn't the TOC decide the process for the entire organization? If it's a requirement, it should be a requirement from TOC or the code move. Otherwise, I don't know. My feeling is we have enough change with the stuff that we in code move and all the requirements. I'm a bit worried about adding more processes and more. And is it networking related, or is it something that should be?
So just real quick, if I can jump in. Costin, last week during the environments meeting, I had suggested we have an epic for the environments work group meeting without a lot of overhead. Just a list of here are the features we're going to do for 1.2. And there was like 5 things on the list. So it's not a huge list. I didn't specify any additional requirements. I do agree with Andra that it would be great if people link that stuff to issue trackers. I would just like to know what our 1.2 roadmap is for the environment work group meeting and get the environments work group focused on that. I think it'd be good for the networking work group to do that as well.
Sure. No, nobody's arguing about not doing creating an epic. I mean, what Andra is saying is that if it's a requirement for people to start putting bugs or linking and creating issues and all this stuff, that's a process that probably it's not under either environment or networking.
Yeah, so this week we had a Git workflow meeting, which Martin was driving. I believe, Costa, you were there, right? So that team is actually producing the standard requirements for PR and issues. So I think there are a lot of consensus from the call this week that we don't want to overwhelming over developers. So for PRs, we are looking at maybe have a little bit more template into the PR, so people at least they need to fill out some of the required information for the PR to come in and merge.
That's fine, and that's a working group. That, I mean, again, and there are requirements that all bugs should have a 3-day. I mean, should not be open for more than 3 days, and without a comment, and without passing it, and should be closed in a timely manner. So using PR issues for this kind of stuff, again, let's leave the working group do the stuff and TOC decide. There's not really networking.
Right, Kosin. However, we shouldn't be prevented or like feel that it's not our job to inform the TOC if we strongly believe, one way or another. So I don't think we should let every decision to be top down coming from the TOC, because TOC, is just
there's a working group for that. So let's not waste time in networking team discussing stuff that is already in the working group that is.
Right. So let me tell you, I think it's really valuable to track the roadmap. We unfortunately don't have enough visibility on what's happening in general. So I heard from you, from Lynn, and from Steve. Does anybody else has opinion on that? So
my comment is anything that would help us, new people understand what the roadmap is and see it is beneficial.
Okay.
And also to know the progress, how we are doing. I think that's where something like an Epic helps. Now, we can change the format, but it's really good to know if you're making progress on the features that we are going to deliver.
Okay, thanks, Neeraj. So how about I take this discussion to the TOC, right? I think there is a meeting on Friday. I'm going to take this particular item and ask, whether they would like to follow this model for all the groups, whether they want to impose a different model on all the groups, or if any group can decide how they track the roadmap.
I believe there is a working group already working on the
Yeah. Andrew, we met just yesterday in the GitHub workflow, and we're talking about stuff exactly like this. So I'm not sure that we need to re-bring this up in the TOC as well.
Okay. So which is the conclusion?
When its conclusion is reached, it will be communicated. I mean, it's a working group is still working, and they're still,
So I guess while the working group is sorting that out, we can kind of do our own thing. But I still think it would be valuable to have some type of roadmap, short 5-6 items that we're working on for the release. I would find that incredibly valuable. I think other people in the community would too.
So, Steve, we can create. I mean, nobody's saying that you cannot create whatever issues or things you want, and Andra can create. I mean, I'm just saying that let's not have each working group define its own processes and requirements. I mean, we cannot impose developers must do this and must do that. For each working group with a different strategy.
Okay. This is so there are two parts to the issues, right? First of all is whether we track the things with the Epic, so it looks like that's beneficial to have, and I can definitely do this exercise. We already have it in the form of a document. We can create Epic for that. And the second part is if any PR is linked to an issue. I think there is a similar proposal somewhere in the code move document. So we'll wait to see if that is a particularly, burdensome for developers. This is a process that's being generally followed in the industry, related to project management. So it shouldn't be such big issue.
Well, if every PR, if the PR is active,
Eugene, sorry, you're breaking up badly. I don't think your headset works well. If you want, I'm in Fusion Drive. You can just come here.
Sure.
I added a link to the proposal that we're working on for the new issues workflow to the main page.
So I think we're mixing up two things here. First is definitely the process of whether we require an issue for each PR or what in general we do with the issues. But another thing is for each feature, it's probably a good idea to file an issue. That's what looks like we've been doing forever. It's not a change of a process, and just it makes total sense for me personally. So let's just probably discuss them separately. The workflow stuff definitely makes more sense for the relevant work group, but for stuff that we're planning to do, why wouldn't we just track this in form of issues or any other form?
Okay. All right, so
Can we move to networking?
So real quick, I'm a little lost on outcomes. What was outcome? I was late. I'm sorry. So what was the outcome, Andra? I missed the.
So what is the outcome of this discussion is that we will, I will take the action of opening GitHub epics for all the features on the roadmap for 1.2. And we will let the CodeMov work group decide whether PRs are associated with an issue or not.
Cool. Thanks, Andra.
Okay, that's my understanding.
Maybe wait a bit until they figure, because the requirement is that any open issue, are going to have metrics and to make sure that any open issue only stay open for a certain amount of time and it's closed and anyone who's assigned to it responds in 3 days. So there is a whole process coming through, and that's why I'm saying let people who are working on that finish the design and not solve this in networking.
So just to make sure there is no confusion about that, there was no effort to kind of impose SLO on the full issue lifetime. There was an effort to enforce SLO on basically triaging the issue, which make total sense, but the issues are different. So
triaging and responding to issues. Triaging and responding to issues. The idea is that we need to respond in 3 days for any open issue, and there will be metrics, and it's not clear yet where and how. And so
right, but not for enhancement, Costin, right? And epics are by definition enhancements. Okay, so we'll go with that for now. Let's move on. There is like a similar governance thing. Produce a decision log for 1.2. So there was a bit of a discussion on Slack, this is about informing, I think, all contributors on the general strategic decisions, right? It's not about every single minor decision. It's more like the long terms. For instance, an example would be, do we use CNI or not by default? Like, or is service entry namespace scoped API or a cluster-wide API? So this kind of things. And the proposal on Slack was that we record this in some documents called ADR. I actually forgot what ADR was standing for, but I can find it. And we document the context, the pros and cons of the, some various approaches, and then we record the decision. And while we have these working group meetings, we can also, I guess, link to those little documents. The documents would be added to GitHub somewhere as READMEs or maybe in a folder. They could also be in the Istio team drive doc, like we have a separate area for our working group. So this is, by the way, it's not a decision of any kind yet. It's just a discussion. How do you feel about this and how we could make this work without being, again, too onerous of a process?
And I would say same thing. There is a document working group, and there are some other meta working groups that are not. So we don't have to make this in each working group.
So this is about recording our decisions, right? So no document working group.
I don't understand perfectly the proposal, Andra. I'm just saying that this is should be something done consistently across the Istio organization, not per working group. That's
so. I think we could make recommendations. About how that should be done, and that's why I put it on the agenda, just to make a recommendation. I don't know if the work groups in CodeMov are looking at this or not. I don't really have time.
The documents working group, I think, as well.
The which one?
Documents, documentation.
Okay, this would be more like an engineering decision log, so not a documentation decision log.
But is it networking specific? It's environment specific? Is security specific? Which work group?
Our work group would have a separate decision log.
Right.
The process basically, where did they put it? How they put it? Is it
undefined? Yeah, that's undefined. But that's the general proposal. I guess I should have taken this to the CodeMov. I don't have time to attend the 4 hours a week of CodeMovs. So if somebody could forward this on, I would appreciate it. Maybe Andre.
Maybe we
So
can have experiment, something, someone can start something, can start a prototype, see how it works, see how it, we shouldn't make big decisions without any data, I would say. That's my...
Okay, so we can still have a discussion whether at least the audience in the networking working group feels that they would be helpful or not, right? Because then we can propose this for other working groups. But I don't think, again, we should let every decision come from the CodeMov meetings. Like there are already many fish to fry in those meetings. So how do we want to record our decisions? And by the way, these are called, like the proposal was to use architectural decision records. These are the ADRs.
Can we use the current process, basically keep maintaining the doc and maybe adding GitHub pages for versioning?
So are you saying, Phil, to like just record in the meeting notes?
Yeah, I think that's one way that of course, once we have a consistent decision from working group, that's great. But before we get there, we definitely need to keep track of everything. So so yeah, the docs work, the GitHub would probably be even better.
Right. So that would be. So you're saying GitHub would be better than docs?
Yeah, I don't know. What are we trying to fix? Is there any limitation with our current approach, basically maintaining meeting notes and video recording?
It's really hard for other people to catch up. Sorry, Andrew, if I cut you off there. It's, you know, the reason I propose this on the agenda is because I think if I were coming into Istio, there's been thousands of decisions made, and maybe 100 of those are strategic, and I'd like to know what those are. That would be very helpful. If I don't have that information, then we have a rehash of that whole discussion every working group meeting. So that's the driving force behind this idea. Probably, again, a topic for the CodeMov instead of the work group specifically.
How about discuss? We already have discussed topic. Can we use it to discuss, and there is track of what was discussed? Usually many groups use mailing list and discussions on the mailing list. Apparently we don't have a mailing list anymore, so discuss is a replacement.
I'd like something a little more formal because discuss gets lost. People lose track of the records, I think, of the decisions. It's just my feeling.
Are you volunteering to maintain those discussions, or do you want to impose something on everyone who...
I'm just opening up a conversation, Costin. I don't have a proposal of how to do it.
I would say that, Steve, I think you do a very good job of maintaining that log. You don't have to. I just think you would do a good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Look, I want to make clear. I mean, my frustration is that there are 20 working groups now that all try to impose decision and processes and change everything when we have a problem that we need to improve testing. I mean, the problem is we need to improve testing, and everyone is starting to create processes and change everything at once. And mostly out of topics. That's my only reason to be so negative here.
Okay, so it is true, Costin, that you know, like normally we haven't been doing governance in this like working group, right? Most of the time we've been discussing like networking specific issues. However, Steve brought up these governance related topics. I think it's okay to like discuss a little bit on them. On this particular architectural decision records, what if we actually bring it up to the TOC to decide? Because it's like some of the strategical decisions are not so much related to networking, but they are of a more general nature. And I think those are the ones affecting most people, right? So I will take an action item to bring this up with the TOC to get some like guidance on this. Meanwhile, nobody prevents us from taking meeting notes in this very networking group meeting notes document that is attached to the meeting and record our decisions, right? Whether we're taking we take it one step farther and we actually store those decisions in a more elaborate format. Again, I don't think anybody can prevent us from doing so.
What if that format
Right?
was a file in Git along with the source code?
Along with the source code.
Yeah, you know, some markdown file with each component.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good one, right? It's the reality is that this is like, again, quite a bit of work, so it's a matter of being disciplined. It's very easy to ask for everything to be documented for you, but each one of us would need to do that whenever a decision is made. So I hope there is not the expectation that, you know, the person facilitating the meetings would actually take all the notes and record every decision, because that's or add those documents to GitHub. So
I really like the proposal from Josh, because that will record the decisions that are actually have any code or any implementation, and not the decisions that are kind of superficial and don't have any.
And it gets to go through code review, so we get to argue.
Yeah, exactly. It got code reviewed. It got there is some code associated with it. It's just, I mean,
it should be one empty Go file, which is in the beginning of the package, which has all the stuff in it. It's like what you have in the Linux kernel, where it's one file, header file with all the hundreds of lines of comment explaining the context. And that should be maintained, though. As decisions change, that file should be updated. I mean, if you look at the service model thing, we have like huge comments explaining what is what and how we do this. And we try our best, not always, to maintain that the main core service model under model.service.go and say this is how the rest of the system is designed. In a similar way, we should just do it for all the other main API objects or decisions that we do.
right. My main concern with like committing this is that it has to go through the regular process, which is not super fast. So sometimes it's easy to record the decision in a meeting notes or a doc right after the meeting or during a meeting. And if we wait for this to be committed to GitHub and somebody would get frustrated that the PR doesn't get through the test legs and everything, then we'll just make it harder for us.
Another way of looking at that is we're making sure that the people who are actually writing the code are actually involved in the decision. And that's not something that's decided only within the committee.
Right, George, but it's not always a like wait for the code type of decision. Sometimes you have to make the decision before you write the code.
But until you write the code, the decision is just paper. So.
Well, it gives you guidance that you're doing the right thing. Okay, so that's exactly what's happening. A lot of people write a lot of code that is not necessarily like strategically aligned, and then they get frustrated that their code is not approved or it doesn't, is not even reviewed, because I mean nobody may focus on that particular aspect, and people have their own things in mind. And so this is basically about working a bit better and more focused as a community, right? It's not about who gets there to write faster the code. It's about writing the code that is actually the right code.
Well, Andrew, I like the idea. I sort of proposed it, I guess. I don't know how to execute it. But yeah, I think, unless somebody has objections, we should figure out how to proceed as a community, how to do this community-wide almost. But again, I don't have a good proposal of how to do it. I just wanted to have like a 5-minute discussion, not a 30-minute discussion on this topic. So to see if people thought this was worth pursuing.
Steve, I think Josh and Sriram had good point, and maybe we can start with what they suggested, which is we add README or markdown files in the code, because for things that are important enough, probably they should be in the README and easily accessible, and then we move forward. If we need to create more epics or whatever, that's fine, but I think we already have And for the hypothetical or maybe wonderful plan, we have design docs. We have plenty of stuff already, so it's not a.
Yeah, one thing I'm thinking, can we align this with the release notes? So today we always create the release notes at the very end. Can we actually, as people have their code merged, also require them to update their file? Maybe we can create a release note file, either per component or maybe in one big file, so that they could also remember to, before their code get merged, they actually remember to update that notes.
So they would do that. Well, okay. So what is the granularity?
It's kind of like
of
what
note?
you are, kind of like what you guys are suggesting, but focus more on the user interfacing ones, right? Because those are the ones impacting over user, and those are the ones we're going to do the work anyway.
I guess I'm just wondering when we would do that. Would we do it for every minor change, or is this for more strategic stuff?
Well, only for user impacting ones that you want to notify people in the release notes, right? Like the default changes, maybe some major improvements, or maybe some of the API change, because that would help us much easier to pull out the release notes together.
Yeah, we talked about this in one of the code mod ones, and I think we decided that we did want to do that. I saw an issue open to start getting all the pieces in place for it.
Yeah, I remember, John, you were discussing that. We haven't decided like whether we have a top level one with multi-repo going on. Maybe we have one per component, so it will be easy transition to separate repo. But I think the general consensus from the code mob call was people were very in favor of tracking this in GitHub.
And maybe someone can write a spreadsheet with all the 100 steps that a developer that wants to write a bit of code needs to follow with all the processes proposed everywhere, because I'm losing track of them.
You make a great point. We don't want to make it too hard on developers. It needs to be easy and friction-free. But certainly the major decisions, for example, just stealing something from the environments worker meeting, we've decided to use Helm only as a templating engine. A lot of people don't know that contribute code. I review 3 or 4 PRs a week where people are adding complex features based upon Helm. I know that's not networking specific, but I don't work a lot on networking. So that happens. And if we could record, okay, we're just using Helm as a templating engine, we don't have to tell people every time they submit a PR, they don't waste their time working on that. We can say, here's what we're doing instead.
Yeah, but I'm not blaming people for not knowing that.
No,
it's not their fault for not attending the work group meeting. I think it's our fault to not communicate that to our user in the release notes, right? Because we never spend the time to communicate to our user, hey, we are only favored through the template approach. And how would they know?
README in the template directory will be a perfect start.
Yeah, that would be a start. I think
let's start.
Yeah, let's start.
By the way, I have a README in the new installer, so we started.
Okay, very good.
So it looks like we're like a bit going in agreement towards using these like README files in various directories to inform about the strategic decisions, right? Should they be called README or something else like?
Well, I think the problem with README is why would people spend time to go through your GitHub README? Most people would just read the release notes, to be honest with everybody.
No, but for there are 2 things. One, release notes, and one is how you should do stuff in this component. I mean, in installer, you must use Helm only for templating, no ifs.
Right. So release note seems to be more for the user, like user visible features, right? While these files or READMEs would be more for developers, more internal stuff.
So we'll have to communicate that to people because most people probably don't know before they submit a PR to a component, they look at the README first.
Right. So my proposal about using an issue for any PR was exactly that. I mean, before you even have the PR, you open the issue, and if people think, that issue is valid, they would accept it. And then your PR will be good. But there is no point in working on an implementation that doesn't fix any problem. or doesn't? It's not
The
an
issue,
enhancement
the issue will
either.
be triaged in 3 days. And
yeah, but if it's an enhancement, let's say somebody proposing an enhancement, and like the working group reviews it and say, we want this feature, then the PR, the associated PR, will not be going to waste, right? But if the PR comes, somebody spent like 2-3 weeks working on a feature, and we say, sorry, but this doesn't fit our model, right? An issue is easy to open, or
And it's
they
hard to
would
find.
open that, and we have like maybe 3 days to review if we say, is this good or bad?
So we are complaining that people don't read README, but they will find all the issues of the 100 issues, or memorize it and read all of them to figure out what is there, and if someone else proposed it, or with the 3 days approval that we are planning and all the other stuff. I mean, I don't know. Let's try to put with a component and see how it works, maybe.
Yeah, this is more complex. I think Costin and Andrew, you both make great points, and maybe this is something we should kick to the code mob team to think more about, because I don't think, well, I don't know, maybe they have thought about it enough, maybe they haven't, I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence of the results of their work yet, so. The first thing, decision log, I think, is easy.
Yeah, but I think I do agree we should have something to pilot with. That's one thing we've also discussed in the code mob. Anything we set to the team as a recommendation, it's much better if we actually gone through that as a golden component, as a golden example, so that we can actually know it works before all the other components jump on it.
And also, after we organize the owners, it would be great if the component is chosen such that the owners of that particular component choose to follow a particular process and be the guinea pig. And we can get feedback and we can learn from his experience. I think for the move to multi-repo is kind of the same thing. We plan to have one component, see how it goes, and then.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. So we spent quite a bit of time on this governance issue. So let's move on to the more networking related topics. So Vadim, I hope you're still with us. So you have you just follow up on the last meeting about the multi-cluster naming.
Yep. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So to remind you the current status of multi-cluster implementations, we currently have 3 major ones. The names are here in the concepts document. The names are multiple control plane topology, single control plane with VPN connectivity, and single control plane without VPN connectivity. And these names are not exact, I would say, because you can have multiple control planes in these settings too. Okay, so it's not necessarily a single control plane. So here, so these are the names in the concepts document. And in the examples, there are other names. So here we have gateway connected clusters versus cluster aware service routing. And also here you can see split horizon EDS. So all these are, first of all, internal names or implementation details. So for example, split horizon EDS is an implementation detail. It doesn't say much to the user, I would guess. And these names are rather confusing, I would say. So it's not clear what's the difference between cluster aware and gateway connected. And it's also not clear when they should be used. Okay. So I propose to provide some simple catchy names. Okay. And I came up with the idea of primary, secondary versus peer-to-peer multi-cluster mesh. So here, let me show you the primary secondary setting. The idea is that some of the clusters are primary, they have the full control plane with the pilot, and some of the clusters are secondary, so they don't have pilot, and they have to connect to some remote pilot. So these secondary clusters cannot operate on their own. If the cluster become, let's say, unavailable, if it loses connectivity to other remote clusters, it cannot operate on its own. While primary cluster can, a primary cluster can operate on its own. It has pilot. Here, every pilot in the primary cluster has to watch all the Kubernetes API servers in all the clusters, in the primary and in the secondary. Okay, so this is one setting.
I'm confused, Vadim, sorry to interrupt you, but is this a new proposal to add? Because we never said that you cannot run pilot or full call. Because the whole idea of the new modular installer is that you can choose a la carte what components you install in each cluster, and you may or may not run pilot. I mean, there is no reason or no plans that I know to have this kind of stuff moving forward. Each user will be able to install in any cluster whatever they choose.
Right. Right, so this is what I just described, the current split horizon EDS multi-cluster. I just propose a better name, in my opinion.
But the naming is not aligned with what we'll have in future. So what we launch, what we'll have in the future does not align with that.
Okay, so in which sense it does not align?
In the sense that the user, I mean, there is no primary or secondary clusters. There are clusters, and in the cluster you can choose to run or not run a pilot cache.
Right, because he's just proposing, like we had a last meeting, we had this discussion that we have confusing names for the various permutations and the spectrum of possible deployments and single control plane, multiple control plane, and all that. So Vadim took the action of actually looking into that and proposing a consistent naming.
Yeah, but it's not going to be consistent with the implementation, because the implementation with the new installers, that, as far as I know, we agreed on, is that it's a la carte and you can install or not install stuff independently. There is no primary, secondary distinctions that we are planning to make in the future.
Yeah,
in the past we made it just to simplify the documentation. It was never required to run a single pilot or to have a primary.
Right, so I just propose a name. I propose to call the cluster with a pilot primary and the cluster without a pilot secondary. So we can choose some other names. For example, I don't know, pilot full and pilotless, whatever, okay? So just this is the distinction, and let me compare it with the other implementation. The other implementation, I propose to call it peer-to-peer. So here all the clusters are equal, okay? You do not, the pilots do not watch Kubernetes API servers in other clusters. They do not provide configuration data to sidecar proxies in other clusters. Here, the connectivity between the cluster is provided by defining or creating or replicating service entries. And you have to run a DNS server here, a special DNS server which will handle .global entries. Just to provide a comparison, okay, for the user or operator, which one to choose. So first, you have high availability. With peer-to-peer, you have full availability. So if some cluster is crashes or is unavailable, okay, this setting continues to operate still. And
but wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we want all the features to be available in all situations. I mean, in all cases, you'll have high availability. There is no situation where we will not have high availability. So in all cases, we'll have multiple clusters running pilot and multiple. So, and the pilot is never required to run in a cluster. You can have a managed version of the pilot. You can have a version of pilots that is running on a VM or some separate environment that is not even running as a cluster for security reasons. I think this kind of drawing a line doesn't make any sense with the futures that we are planning or with what we have.
Yeah, my point is here, if a cluster without a pilot loses connectivity to its pilot, I mean, it will not be able to operate.
To which pilot? Because again, the idea is that you have redundant clusters running pilot. You lose connectivity to internet completely.
For example, yes.
then you'll not be able to reach other pods. I mean, it's what's.
Suppose you are,
data plane will still work in that cluster, right?
Data plane will continue to work, of course. You cannot make changes.
Yeah. So it is a difference. Like he has a good point. There is a separate scenario.
And also DNS, we should have DNS in all cases, and we don't want to make A, B, where there is a spectrum, and the user has choice what to install and what not to install. It's not like we want to continue to support 2 cases and have a red line. You cannot run a global DNS if you choose not to use pilot in each data center.
Yeah. Okay. So I propose this currently to name these 2 implementations somehow. I mean, currently we have these 2 different examples with the names that are not clear in my opinion.
How about not naming? I mean, just have multi-cluster, and then in multi-cluster you have options of deployment. And the option of deployment is you choose to deploy or not deploy a pilot. You choose or choose not to deploy a DNS. I mean, it's much simpler for a user to have, because multi-cluster is multi-cluster. In the end, you have pods deploying the multiple clusters talking with each other. And in multi-cluster, yeah.
I think the issue is that we have a spectrum of different deployment models, and we're documenting them in the docs as we're labeling them as a specific type of multi-cluster or model of multi-cluster.
This is bad. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I don't think we should double down on the bad, but we should fix the root problem. The root problem is that we really have a single multi-cluster, and the multi-cluster has different deployment options.
So, Costin, I don't know if you've seen the document that Vadim's been working on, but there's like 150 comments in it probably. So this is a hot topic. I can link it to you later if you like to take a look.
I haven't looked into it.
In the meeting notes, right? So
okay.
Everything is in there.
Yeah, so it's the first time I see it, and my reaction is again, it's not, doesn't match what I know we are planning.
Okay. Yeah,
but what we have. I mean, it doesn't match either of them.
Yeah. So Kostya, we're not really planning to change the things we have, right? In this perspective. But what I hear from you is that it seems to be a good idea to separate the deployment of pilot from all the other connectivity options, right? Like he has permutation on deployment, on whether it's VPN connectivity or not. And I bet there is one related to the root CA, like if it's a federated model or not. Right?
I don't think we support any case where the CA is not, where we don't have a common root of trust. Or I'm not aware of any plan to support such a thing.
Yeah, it's not supported currently, right? But it is a possibility in the future.
Yeah, Kostin, so I just propose to name these deployment options. So we have different deployment options, and I propose to find some descriptive names for them and to explain the users what are the difference currently. So here in this table, okay. I mean, I do not insist on these names. We can find some other names, but I think we should find something better than just gateway connectivity and cluster aware or split horizon EDS.
So I agree with that, and I think the solution is to have one name which is multi-cluster, and as you said, describes the options you have when you deploy multi-cluster. Like you have the option to deploy.
We need some shorthand names, because if you have a multi-cluster and you want to install another one, you want to be able to tell someone, I have this kind of multi-cluster, set up another one for me. Or if you're having trouble, someone's going to ask, well, what kind of multi-cluster do you have? There has to be a short summary name for the most common types.
But there is no such thing as you have one type of multi-cluster. You have multi-cluster, meaning you have multiple. One multi-cluster, you have more than one cluster. How you configure is there is no rules that you have to have only VPN. You have 5 clusters with VPN. You may have 3 clusters running DNS, running pilot. You may have 2 clusters running GALIs. That's a deployment you choose based on, you have the global, the organizational install of Istio. You may have local, small clusters that are running locally, and you have different requirements. There is no one type of cluster or the other. It's both of them are possible at the same time. You can have cluster which part of it is on shared. That's the whole idea of multiple networks. You have a set of clusters on VPN, another set of clusters on another VPN communicating to gateways. It's still one mesh. You don't start with a mesh and stick with that mesh forever.
So I think there are two things here. the first one is really how do we document multi-cluster, and I agree with Kostin, it should be flexible and really display that there are no like strict requirements of what we do. And like another part to it is whether we want to provide reference examples to our users. Basically, here are, we can call them like reference setups or examples, like literally. And if we want to maintain such like reference examples, which I believe we should, right? Then we would definitely want better naming for those than what we have right now. But this probably should be just separate, and that would.
How about we set us? I agree with Phil. How about we set up an example when we document multi-cluster? We have a single document describing multi-cluster, and we have a test case even with a multi-cluster that has all the features and all combinations. So we make it clear that when you set up a Istio multi-cluster, you can deploy multi-cluster with some subset running pilot, subset not running. So basically we set with a multi-cluster with 5 clusters, 2 of them running pilot and flat VPN, 1 of them behind the gateway, and basically with all the options to make it clear to users that we have options of deployment to match your organization, but there is no such thing as 2 kinds of multi-cluster. There is only one multi-cluster with different networking internal implementation.
Yeah, okay, so let me just describe maybe the implications for the users regarding these different deployment options. Okay, so in one deployment option, the user has to provide and configure access to Kubernetes APIs. Okay, and they also have to configure the sidecars to communicate with remote pilots. Okay, in the peer-to-peer deployment option, you do not configure access to Kubernetes APIs. Okay. And you do not configure your sidecar proxies to communicate to remote pilots. So this is a difference in configurations, but there you have to replicate or create service entries, and you have to deploy this DNS server for .global domain.
How is load balancing even implemented? I lost track of that.
These are now implementation details question. Okay, so. In general, these are 2 different deployment options, and they have different implications for the users.
Right. And I think I really like Phil's proposal about providing some reference architectures here. And I think those should be a bit simpler to understand than a full architecture with everything combined in there. So I doubt everybody would want to do, the VPN connectivity stuff when they don't have that. Okay. So, Vadim, I really thank you for, taking on this almost Herculean thing of trying to name this and find a good way for us to refer to that. So we have like this document, and we have, like somebody said, there are over 100 comments. We should definitely continue commenting on the document and reach some conclusion on that. Because what we have currently is really not good. Like all these names plus all the internal implementation details spilling into the docs, like split horizon EDS, that's not a concept for the user, right? And it's really like we really have to do a good job here.
Okay, let's continue to work on the document.
Yeah, I propose we reconvene on this topic in 2 weeks. If Vadim, you can join. I know the time is not the best for you, but I think we should revisit this in 2 weeks after everybody spends a bit more time reading the document. Kostin just said it's the first time he saw it.
And I was not aware this is even in scope for code move, because one thing to remember is that out of all this discussion, only one is beta quality and has testing, and the others are still alpha and probably should not be mixed for this reason.
Listen, Kostin, not everything is code mob here, okay? This is the Istio networking meeting, and we have to improve the user experience as well. And the user experience relates to how they perceive our features, right? If they read this page and they don't understand what this is about, we haven't done a good job.
No, what I'm saying is that we have a roadmap for 1.2, and probably we need to focus on if this is in roadmap to make some of those options, beta quality or production quality in 1.2, perfect. We should document them and have them, but we should not give the impression that all of things here work or are supported or are the same level. And so there are options that we have with different level of support, a different level of stability, and we need for user to be aware of what exactly is possible.
Right, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, they are all alpha status if you look at our 1.1 website.
I believe we have one of them is kind of, I mean, the TOC agreed to move multicluster to beta, I believe, or was discussed. I don't know.
Well, not right now.
Not right now? Okay, whatever.
Right, but multi-cluster is definitely on the roadmap. And by the way, this exercise is related to improving the documentation, and it's for a consistent naming of our features. It's not about code changes. Like what Vadim is doing, he's trying to get consensus on how we name these things. Okay, which is obviously like pretty hard to do.
Yeah, understood. So, I actually think our documentation today with the multiple deployment model is actually clearly spelled out on the differences. So it actually, I like the notion of single control plane, multiple control plane. It's kind of separated really nicely, and it's much easier to explain to other people in the way we have. So if we come up with something, I just want to make sure it's actually much better than what we have right now.
I think the multi-control plane will be something you'll have on a single cluster with a new installer. So I
got you.
Kind of okay, so we should the new installer first, because there is no like new installer as far as we know, right? Like we have to see first and understand what is so different about it.
So that's something that so far has been agreed. As far as I know, we have consensus to use the multiple environments and multiple namespaces and support multiple versions and configuration at the same time. And I think that's a decision that, well, we need to record it. Thank you, Steve.
Right.
We should take care of make sure that this at least is clearly documented.
And
but multiple control planes, I think that's currently the plan of record.
So my understanding was that the new installer is about separating each component like pilot, galley, and mixer in their own namespace and has nothing to do with the multi-cluster.
No, it has to do with multiple control planes. You'll have multiple control planes in a single cluster or in multiple cluster or whatever, but you will be able to choose your control plane.
Okay, so maybe the next time you can walk us through this, or in the environments meeting as well. That would do. Okay, so guys, we only have like 4 minutes left, and there is one more topic, and I hope Timio.
I'm still here.
Sorry for like.
No, it's good discussion.
Hopefully, it's just an update.
Exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. So Sergey Bezvarky, he's gotten a lot of good progress on IPv6. He's got a few PRs merged and one PR left. And we've started trying to do end-to-end testing with, I had a lot of experience with the Circle CI testing with the CNI. So that actually the project that I based the CNI tests off of actually is what Kubernetes tests IPv6 with in Circle CI. So I just hooked up the test for IPv6 and have been running that with Sergey's IPv6 change set. So
perfect.
There's some warts. So we have to. It looks like node port's not really working correctly in that environment, and some of our tests depend on that. So there's some things that are still gotchas, but we're able to do something, right? So
if you don't mind, are you using Kind?
No, unfortunately, I'm using. So we looked into Kind. Kind's not really IPv6 ready, as far as Sergey found out. So KDC is another DIND variant. So it's actually
KDC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take
a look, if you don't mind, on the Istio installer, so Istio ecosystem solution installer, where also we have now we are using Kind, but I think we can plug this as well. So we are looking exactly into this problem for the new installer, testing the new installer and part of CodeMove.
Okay.
I'm not attached in any way to Kind. I mean, any solutions that would work in a similar way with Kind, it would be great to support. But
it should be close. I mean, I was trying to get more familiar with how specifically Kind sets up kubeatom, so we could potentially tweak it to work with V6. So but we haven't really gotten time to spend on that yet. So
yeah, actually, I was talking to the Kind developer, and I mean, there is a mixed approaches entertained within the Kind, so there is no consensus even on their end. I mean, some people are pushing one configuration, other people disagreeing, pushing a different. So I don't see in the near future a good IPv6 solution with the Kind. So I mean, I think what Tim is doing makes more sense, and it's more kind of interesting because I mean it's there already. And at the same time, I put together a script that brings Ubuntu based installation of a single node with the IPv6, where you can also test the IPv6 changes. What would really help is actually to merge them, because now we have to base PRs on PRs on PRs, and it's not very productive.
But Sergey, there is I mean, the idea is that CodeMove requirement is to have tests for each feature. That's the reason and we can have a branch, we can have whatever, but we need tests. We cannot. IPv6 is broken because we didn't have tests really. So anything that can be automated is perfect. I don't care if it's Kind or Dined or whatever, but it needs to have an automated test that someone else can reproduce it and repeat it.
Yeah, maybe the branch model is the way to go for this feature, and then once because I think it's going to take a little bit because we
already have branches, and we can do development on branches. We did this for a long time. I mean, if it's a problem of merging and whatever, it's not blocked in any way. And I'm not asking for a lot of tests. I mean, for this that PR, I only asked to have a way to reproduce it so someone can verify that it works.
Right.
Even if it's manual, I think we can live with it since IPv6 is not, used by everyone, but we need something at least.
Yeah, if you could check the latest PR, the second PR that actually brings up the IPv6 cluster. So once it's merged, then, I mean, it has no changes in the API or anything. It's just the script to bring the cluster. So once it's merged, then it's going to be more easier to run the E2E tests and to deal. Because, I mean, have everything in the same PR, it just doesn't make sense.
Okay, happy to approve. No problem. I mean, again, the reason I put a hold on that PR is didn't have any test. And I think everyone who's reviewing PR should start doing this because that's a requirement from CodeMove to make sure no PR goes in without some testing. Sorry, I mean, I didn't try to be hard or to single you out, but that's what we've been told that we need to do. To ask for tests.
So Sergey, with the script that you're doing, would that be potentially runnable in Prow because it's just single node and it's just going to set up a local IPv6 interface and use like Calico, I guess, to set up a overlay IPv6 network?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Pro. If it gives us a VM, like let's say Ubuntu Xenial or Bionic, then yes, we could do it. If it gives you container,
actually it won't. It won't. So it'll give you a VM that we could use to install.
But you won't be able to change the networking, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like there's a VM that you guys use for mesh expansion tests. We could maybe use that to install a kubeatom, have kubeatom run in that environment for single node. And
actually, that may work. That may work. We can have a dedicated VM that is just running IPv6 tests and is updated post-submit. I think that would be acceptable.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
The Bosco's pools already have a VM that just sits there for the mesh expansion test.
I also want to have this as a post-submit test. So my concern today is to make sure that everything can be tested for stability. And I want to have a long-running test so we can qualify it just like we qualify all the other features. But that will be perfect because we can maintain a VM that is running the latest and Let me take this action item and see if I can get so one VMs that or a set of VMs that are running. You need IPv6 support externally or just IPv6?
No, just single node is what.
Okay, let's take it offline and I'll try to help.
Okay. Cool. That's all I wanted to do is just.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're done for today. Anything else burning? Okay, well, thanks team for the update, and thanks everybody for joining. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks, Sandra. Bye, folks.